Welcome to yet another episode of Disruption Talks. We invite top experts to discuss digital acceleration, winning strategies, innovation, and scaling products. And most of the time, those are directly correlated with successful funding rounds that you hear in the top pages of TechCrunch or other tech media outlets or business outlets. And we are hosting a returning guest, Dan Westgarth, the CEO of Deel. So, Dan, welcome on stage. Great to have you again. I'm actually at Web Summit. I wish I could say it's greetings from sunny Portugal, but not this time. Unfortunately, there's rain. I know that actually the CEO of Deel, Alex, will be also giving two talks tomorrow and the day after tomorrow.
And the next couple of days. So thanks for hosting us.
It's our pleasure. So last time we spoke, I believe it was in May. And I was looking at some numbers. Your customer base in September, 500 customers. Your customer base in April, 1,800. Your customer base right now, 4,500. Those including Dropbox, Coinbase, Shopify. You essentially 9x'd your customer base. So we are also speaking here on the basis of the 425 million funding round that has given you a quintucorn, if I'm not messing up my Latin here, valuation. A Series D founding round. So before we dive into Deel, I know you, you know me, but this is a fresh interview for some. So perhaps a general background introduction concerning you, how you got into Deel, and what are you doing at Deel right now?
Sure. A little bit about me. I joined the world of tech straight out of school. The first company I was involved with was Revolut, where I was an early employee. Worked on the operations team and product team for some time, and my biggest achievement over there was moving to the US and setting up Revolut USA. So I launched the product into the US market, hired the team. I was the first pair of boots on the ground there, so everything from incorporating the company to cleaning the floors in the office to hiring the people. Had a lot of fun doing that. And then got introduced to the folks at Deel, became very close friends with the founders and execs of the company. And that's what got me here today.
Okay, I mean, I'm no surprise if you looking at how Revolut is doing right now, you must have done a pretty kick-ass job. So no surprise that Deel wanted to get in on some of that professional action as well. So we spoke about the brief introduction, past experiences, but now transitioning into the current role, you're the Chief Operating Officer. And I could ask you for a short answer, what does that mean on a day-to-day basis? But I'd also like to hear some sort of comparison, how that has changed between our last conversation and now, given the skyrocketing growth.
Sure. So I think that startups change significantly over certain frequencies in time. A lot of businesses that I speak to say, oh yeah, every quarter is different or every 6 months is different. With Deel, really, every month is different. And we can draw a very clear line from month to month, given that we operate a batch run system, which is payroll. It's very clear for me as COO to see a distinction between October and November, a distinction in terms of processes, people, product, and service delivery. So last time we spoke, we were probably around 100 people across 20 or 30 countries around the globe. Today, we're over 400 people across 50 different countries. So the team itself has grown, and that means the way that we organize ourselves has grown, has changed. So we've created what I like to think of as full stack teams, teams which minimize dependencies between one another and can get on with things and get stuff done without having to wait from deliverables from other parties. That keeps us incredibly quick, agile, and accountable for what we're doing. I think what's really interesting is you mentioned that a customer base has grown by a multiple. That's the businesses that are using Deel to pay their remote teams. If we look at the actual employees and contractors and workers on the platform, this number has grown much, much larger. We're now seeing 1,000 signups a day onto the Deel platform. There are people that are coming onto Deel and wanting to work remotely and wanting to get paid and wanting to be engaged by one of these clients, whether they're an employee for Coinbase or a contractor for another company. And that's what's really amazing. We're just still really at the tip of the iceberg of what is this huge international payroll and remote work market.
Yeah, you do seem and you do sound unstoppable in that regard. So if I may throw a bit of a curveball here, is there any situation in which Deel is not the solution to hire internationally? Like, have you seen perhaps some geographies with extremely strict regulations that could not be worked with or around, or it's just a matter of time essentially? Because, like you mentioned, I spoke of the number of customers, but those customers have a number of employees. So that goes into further multiples of people who simply are on the platform.
No, I think compliance is our cornerstone and competitive advantage. I draw some really clear parallels from the cryptocurrency space 20 years ago. We've used Coinbase's name a couple of times. I'll continue to use it. Coinbase got ahead of regulation, obtained licenses, developed relationships with regulators and legislators, and became one of the most trusted names in the space. We at Deel are doing the same. What we're doing is operating in a highly regulated market. Most people forget this because the topic doesn't get that much, say, limelight, but employment law and HR regulation is extremely complicated and extremely serious. Doing that over 100 different countries and productizing that and putting it into one platform is something that's not easy. It's in fact really, really tough to do. So that's what keeps us competitive. And we're able to offer our companies the ability to hire anyone, anywhere, excluding high-risk countries, excluding countries which are unfavorable from AML perspective, including countries which are sanctioned. Just about every other jurisdiction in the world, we're able to help our clients hire someone. We've had people come from countries that I haven't even heard of, some countries which aren't recognized by other countries, and we've been able to support them and make sure that they can hire in a legally compliant way.
The last thing that you said, how different countries, for various reasons, just don't recognize the rightful existence of another country. So that's extremely interesting for me, how that you actually have managed to work around that. And there's a question from the audience, very much in line with what we're discussing right now. Sean asks, at the pace that you're expanding, how do you keep with the constantly changing legislation differing from country to country? And I'm curious to hear if you've seen some movement from those countries. I'm assuming in this question that you're dealing with some of the representatives of those countries regarding compliance directly. Have you seen any urge or effort to perhaps not just tell you, this is a regulation, this is what you have to work with, or this is a regulation, but Deel makes a lot of sense. How can we work together on actually making that regulation less rigid, not just for Deel, but for everybody?
For sure. I love this question. So there's two ways to answer this. I think, first of all, how do we keep up with constantly changing legislation? Well, practically, we need to be proactive and we need to scan the horizon. And we do that through our network of local partners. So we can see regulatory changes before they happen. We can anticipate them, and we can make sure when they happen, we are prepared to act fast. Similarly, to your point, how can we actually work with countries to develop new legislation? Well, that's what's really, really exciting to us. And especially how we mentioned, some countries in the world have relatively young, immature regulations and legislation surrounding this kind of stuff. Not to say that immature regulation is bad, it just means it hasn't been around compared to some of the others. But that creates such a springboard for us to develop new guidance, right? And that doesn't just stop at employment. That can span to immigration. That can span to taxation. That can cover a whole number of items. It's just the past couple of weeks we've been looking at Estonia and working through getting immigration authorization to allow employees to be mobile in and out of Estonia. Really, really amazing to see some of the regulations over there and how we can work with the local authority and local government to make that really easy for people to live and work in Estonia when on the Deel platform.
It must feel like a Rubik's Cube mixed with a game of whack-a-mole, essentially, especially when you have two different regulations changing at the same time and they juxtapose each other, right? I mean,
Yes.
that's super impressive that Deel is managing that without a hitch, I'm assuming.
Something like that. I mean, there are also, there are various curveballs that are thrown at us. Another good example in Mexico, outsourcing was effectively made illegal without an authorization. So navigating the local Mexican legislation and making sure that we have the relevant authorization and can be there ahead of the curve is something that we're really proud and happy to be able to deliver at Deel.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, but maybe in 20, 50 years, there'll just be a small island called D-Land where you will be managing everything and your regulation will be spearheading as an example for every other country.
Yeah.
So you have also introduced a couple of new products, right? So there's the Deel Premium, there's the Deel app for employees, managing it up to even such positions where you're not just hiring for the sake of hiring, but you're hiring for the sake of perhaps a long-term loyalty building approach where someone has to receive stock options. You have increased the complexity a lot, but maybe just with the Deel Premium and the Deel app for employees, if we could talk about that. Deel Premium, how is Premium different from non-Premium?
I would rather park Deel Premium because
Okay.
I want to leave that to someone else in the organization and would rather take Deel Employee App because that's something that the operations team have been really closely involved in. So the genesis of the Employee App is that as we approach larger customers, as we approach enterprise customers, like some of the ones that we've mentioned, the focus on the objective of doing onboarding and employee lifecycle management gets really, really, really sharp. Effectively, why is that? Well, if we think about it, an enterprise company has a very developed people operations organization, perhaps have a VP of people. They have a complex structure with different objectives, which are all ultimately working towards providing a great employee experience. Now, these teams are industry and country specific. So let's take a US company, for example. A US company is delivering an onboarding process in the US to a really, really high standard. Well, now they want to come to Deel and they want to hire remotely. So they want to hire someone in the UK, someone in Brazil, someone in Mexico. Our employee app takes the matrix of different onboarding and lifecycle management requirements. So let me give you an example. In Poland, as you probably know, Philippe, a medical test is required before you can start an employment. Or in Egypt, for example, military service certification is required and validation of that is required before you can start employment. So we take all of these requirements and we bundle them into what we call employee app. So the employee can walk through these steps and the visibility of progress through them is shared to both sides. So not only is the employee doing something which is within their expectation, the client can see how they're progressing. So it empowers the client to continue to deliver on that really, really good employee experience in, say, Egypt from the US. And it delivers something which is within the employee's expectations in their country. So they're not looking at something which is completely foreign. They're not saying, well, I don't understand this US healthcare norm. I don't know what a retirement fund is. I call it pension. I don't know what 401k is. I know these things because this is what I'm used to and this is what I expect. And the employee app has really productized that and makes it really easy. In fact, one of the most amazing things that we found is we can actually onboard an employee end-to-end in a matter of minutes. If we remove dependencies like a medical test, if we zoom in on the Egypt case, where that certificate of military service already exists, we can onboard that person cross-jurisdiction in a matter of minutes.
So if I'm getting this right, the need for that certification just stops existing? It's just
no. It's provided to us in the employee application. We will validate and verify it. We will hold it and store it in our database pursuant to local regulations. Usually there will be some kind of registration required. So for example, in Portugal, social security registration is required. The employees actually have to be registered with the social security authority before they can start work. All of these steps are productized, and the employee can execute on them almost independently on a self-serve basis. This has never been done before. If we look at the incumbents and legacy players in this market, they've had teams of humans on hand exchanging emails and making phone calls to guide the employee through. We have that as well, but we've done this product first, web first, internet first. So self-serve is possible most of the time.
Okay, so we're essentially all the things that could be expected during onboarding from the employee. They just make sure that all of that is arranged beforehand. And as the company that's hiring, I just plug and play essentially, right?
Exactly. And it's all about transparency and giving both sides of this kind of transaction full visibility on what's going on. So the employee agreement, for example, we get that out to both parties as soon as possible so they can look at it and they can understand it without being pressured into signing it within a very short time frame.
Yeah, that is probably one of those things that you want to sign it, the company expects you to sign it, it's all going to be fine, but well, contracts are for both great and not so great times. So that's a very good thing that you're doing for the employees, soon to be employees. We have more questions that are very much in line with what I wanted to talk about and what we're talking about right now, the product. So Alexandros, I hope I'm not mispronouncing that. Apart from enabling companies to hire remotely, is there a plan for Deel to expand its product to act as a remote job platform, CRM, sourcing tool to help match remote talent with companies? If, of course, you can speak to that.
I don't think there's a short-term plan to do this. I think what's really interesting is looking at the vision for where Deel is going. Right now, we'll kind of tap the tip of a huge market. It really is the tip of an iceberg. The 5,000 or so customers that we have, and the employees and remote workers that we help pay, it's just a tiny number. This market is enormous. And with that, there are a few interesting kind of longer term plays. One is what you're outlining here. And I think the second one is this. I'm going to call it the stickiness effect. It's the stickiness of the platform. So an employee or a remote worker can be engaged on Deel, and then when they change jobs, they can take Deel with them to their next employer or to their next client. I think that's what becomes really exciting, and then Deel becomes not only this kind of marketplace platform, CRM or sourcing tool, but almost like this operating system for your company. And for you as a remote worker or you as an employee, it's almost like your operating system where you get paid, where your pay slips are hosted, where your tax information is hosted. If you think about taxation now, even on a personal level, it's very confusing. You go into your Google Drive, you have different tax folders arranged by years. You have your pay slips. Maybe if you're American, you have your W-2s. If that can all be taken and put into this company or employee operating system, and that can be transferred between employers and between clients, I think that's fascinating, and that's a long-term vision that we may or may not execute on. Let's see.
That's really solid, and it starts having, I mean, just like you mentioned, when there's Deel as a product, then Deel as an OS, and then Deel as something that is even perhaps reducing the number of civil cases where people have had some errors with filing taxes, or they couldn't access some things. I know that in Poland, for example, you're supposed to keep as a sole proprietor documents for 5 years back. So and when all of those just becomes less analog, just like you said, in the Google Drive, that's still analog. You're still dragging, dropping.
Well, it's quite a nice segue into another one of our products. Earlier in the year, we acquired a German company called Zygold. One of their products is Sorted, which is now run on the Deel platform, and Sorted helps independent contractors in Germany make the relevant registrations in order to be legal in country, but then also helps them prepare and file their taxes, and then stores all of those documents and is that system of record for them. Same for stock options. Now, stock option grant letters, offer letters, plan documentation can actually be stored in Deel. So that's one system of record. Helps you stay organized and just reduces the manual overhead.
Okay, so what about this scenario? As a sole proprietor, I could be working with several companies. Do I need someone or all of those companies to be onboarded into Deel, or is there a way for me as a sole proprietor to use Deel w- with me being the customer of Deel essentially, not the companies that are employing my services?
Yeah, so we allow signups from both sides. So you can either become a customer of Deal as a company, um, or as an individual sole prop. With the sole prop setup, um, he or she can invite the company, and that sign up process is kind of low touch and expedited, making it really easy. So we see a number of customers that engage with multiple companies on the Deal platform, especially those that have been freelancing for a long period of time. We see 3 or 4 engagements on the platform.
Okay, so consider this plus one user on that for me. I'll be doing that shortly after the interview. Um, Another question that we have, um, it comes from Milos. I hope I'm not mispronouncing that. A general question: how do you handle issues regarding the exponential growth of your team?
Um, okay, good question. I think there are a number of fundamental principles that we follow at various different stages of growth. Um, Fundamentally, it's all rooted in people. So, are we hiring the right people? What are we optimizing for? At Deal, we're always optimizing for speed, learning, and iteration. We minimize dependencies within teams, which means people can really get on with things and get things done without waiting around for others or other scaling initiatives that we run from time to time. So, gap analysis of parts of the product we could do better, and how do we close those gaps as quickly as possible? Which gaps have the biggest impact, and how do we prioritize those? A qualification on problems that we solve. I think as operators, we need to be very problem focused, and we effectively have an unlimited number of problems to solve. There are always things we can do better. We pick the problems which have the highest impact, and then repeat.
Okay, so thank you for that. Alexandros is thanking you for the previous answer that you gave. Um, this thought just comes to mind that of course sometimes we look at companies in terms of their enterprise value, the growth, let's calculate valuation, revenue times a multiple, but also what I'm seeing here is that Deal, uh, assuming what you said becomes true, there's no reason for it not to. Let's 10x that number of customers, and let's imagine that you're in a huge macro scale, that you become the standard essentially, that governments are begging to work with you. Over time you become a huge element of the economy, because the more productivity you can elicit, the more roadblocks you're reducing from people just to start working and start getting paid, then we're no longer looking at something that has a valuation of this or that goes as an IPO of that, but just becoming a very strong pillar of the economy essentially.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm based in the US, and the US government loves to tweet and advertise the unemployment rate. It happened throughout the Trump administration and now throughout the Biden admin. That's really interesting. Of course, the US is a gigantic market, and we're just a pinhead in that right now. But we look at some of the other markets in which we operate, some of the remote countries, some of the countries which have much smaller populations and a much lower GDP. It'd be really interesting to think how we Deal are actually shifting and moving the needle on that country's unemployment rate.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you can't just extract as an abstract concept Deal versus no other circumstances, but over time, if you can simply assume that those people wouldn't be able to work in location XYZ, then sounds like a simple math formula that could work. And speaking of this, you are sitting on a boatload of data, right? So another question that we have from the audience comes from Sean, uh, and it's split into two comments, so I won't put it on the screen. Uh, the quick follow-up question is: does that mean that through your platform, there's even a possibility to forecast employment rates based on legislation becoming less restrictive for people relocating for work? But we can make that question broader, because if you have so much data about employment, about salaries, about all of those things that help companies, countries, governments prepare and people assume something about the economy. I think there's a huge sort of even think tank in terms of recruitment and employment data that Deel has and will have more and more.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the data set right now is still relatively small. I think there's a much way to go, much further way to go until we start utilizing that. But I think it's really going to play into that narrative of collaborating with governments. How can we be the guys supporting and almost helping write legislation in these given countries? And ultimately, this is a very positive thing for these countries. Unemployment rate we've really zoomed in on, but also taxation revenues, right? If there are people employed in these countries, that's revenue for the government. That's money coming into the economy. That's GDP produced. So all of these metrics become really, really interesting, and it's going to be interesting to see how client countries react. The kind of importing countries. We've talked a lot about the exporting countries, the countries which are exporting talent. What about the importing countries that are consuming that? It's going to be a really, really fascinating space over time.
Definitely. I mean, I foresee a Deel and perhaps a government Deel product, essentially, right?
Yeah, it's interesting to see how different governments handle some of these topics. For example, in the UK and Ireland, the government is somewhat forward-thinking when it comes to technology. So they have a government payroll APIs that we can tap into and use to calculate payroll, but also remit money to the various government and authority entities. Estonia is another really interesting one. So governments can kind of really double down on these initiatives, similar to, say, PSD2 in Europe, which is a payment service regulation that has helped, say, interoperability between bank accounts. It's helped promote the sharing of data, lower price points for consumers. And governments have done this for very, very clear reasons. And I think the same will happen with this kind of payroll and employment legislation sphere as this market develops.
Okay, so your audience, as you've heard, we don't have an office there, no longer flies, right? So I'm also curious about the competition. Of course, no need for name dropping, but is there competition, or have you just left everybody so far back that catching up is it's better just to wait to be acquired by Deel at this point?
Yeah, I think that's competition. I think that we are much further ahead. Technology and service is what sets us apart. So I think we've been further ahead for quite a long time, and that gap has been increasing just in terms of technology. There's so much on our platform which is not on the others, and in order to do this really, really well and scale, you need technology. I think if you're building a service-based business which relies on email, manual actions, string and sellotape kind of no-code solutions, you can only get so big. You can serve a couple of thousand customers across a handful of countries. If you really want to execute on the vision that we're laying out at Deel, you really need to be tech first, and you really need to be very focused on that. And that's what's setting us apart.
Yeah, there's another question from the audience, but I wanted to wrap this up in terms of competition, because when you and I spoke about competition just a second ago, I'm pretty sure we had in mind other startups, right? Is that what you were responding with? Because that's how I asked the question, essentially.
Yeah, well, I mean, fundamentally, this industry has been around for decades, probably centuries, if not thousands of years. The concept of leasing labor between countries, perhaps a little bit of a murky past in history, but the fundamental concept has been around for a long time. The last few decades, we've seen what I call service-based businesses emerge, and they've built pretty big businesses. They've employed hundreds, perhaps even thousands of people and provided services for a few thousand companies. They haven't been tech first and internet first. By their very nature, they've been service based. The way I can think about it is it's BlackBerry versus iPhone. What we're doing at Deel is we've taken a true internet first and almost fintech first approach. Everything we've built is on a fintech core, which can scale 100,000x. The fintech structure, it isn't even creaking in the wind yet. It's extremely robust. And that's what's setting us apart. And the other startups which are in this kind of market, they haven't designed their platform that way. They've incorporated a few companies and put together some legal framework. What we've built is something that can really scale. And we're being slow with our scaling. Frankly, we could really open the taps on paid marketing and drive a lot more growth, but we're not, because we want to make sure that the service stays really good, make sure customer support, customer success, employee experience is really good, make sure that company trust is withheld, and we become not only the best product in terms of technology, but also the best product in terms of service.
And that makes complete sense, with no walls closing in, such as lack of funding, lack of customers, or any competition on the horizon. Then that is a very privileged position that you should enjoy, as you said, to focus on the product and service. But the reason why I asked about what we had in mind, both you and I, when we said competition, is that I'm also looking, for example, at, say, huge recruitment agencies. Of course, once again, no need to drop a name, but there are several top players that we know of, and of course, consider incumbents. But is there no slight chance of them to all of a sudden attempt to expand what they have with a Deel-like feature approach to their core service offering?
We're actually seeing the opposite. So I had a question from the audience earlier. Would we get into that kind of recruitment agency marketplace model? It's interesting, because in order to do that really well, you need to be focused on very different things. And we're seeing big companies in this space come to us to want to be customers of and consumers of Deel, to be our enterprise clients, because they want to focus on what they're really good at, which is sourcing, vetting, and placing talent. And they want to let us deal with compliance and payments and HR law. So I actually think it's going to be the opposite. I think that those companies are going to say, actually, we don't make a lot of money from this. We make a lot of money from sourcing, placing, vetting talent. So let's focus on that, and let's outsource that other stuff to Deel.
Yeah, inevitable. And the question that I mentioned from the audience, Milos, once again, the pandemic started a huge stir in the workforce market, with so much movement towards permanently remote positions, or maybe not just permanently remote, but hybrid, and you get to choose if you want to come to the office, right? When do you think that wave will settle, and will we get a clearer picture of how will future organizations source their talent? I have to agree with the premise of this question, because a lot of things that we are assuming right now about work, especially remote work as the standard, is it's less than 24 months old in terms of the push from the pandemic. So when the dust settles, if it does settle, what happens then?
I think it's almost going to be linked to culture and industry, so culture of geography and industry of work, and different cultures and different industries are going to react differently. I think today in America, if a company isn't offering a hybrid model or is mandating return to the office, that's a huge red flag. Hybrid working is now seen as a real kind of pivotal benefit. I think anyone that's going into the job market right now is gonna require that and want that. And I think we saw, 5-10 years ago, companies like Google and Stripe really kind of putting a lot of money into on-campus benefits. For example, catering, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Other on-campus benefits. I think now that's changed, right? And I think that people do want a nice, clean space to work from a couple of days a week, maybe more than a couple of days a week. But they also want the added flexibility of being hybrid, of being able to stay at home when they need to. Perhaps they've got a family, perhaps they've got some other commitments. I don't think this is going to happen the same in every single country of the world. I don't think it's going to happen the same in every single industry. But I think that what we're going to see is not a simple settling of wave, but rather a brand new kind of job market. There are new factors within this job market, and it won't be the same as it was before.
Okay, Milos, thank you for that question. So I wanted to ask you something on a personal plane, if I may. stop me
Sure.
anytime. But usually we ask the questions of a decision-making framework and so on. But we already asked you those questions. And I don't want to repeat the same questions to get a similar or a different answer. I'm much more interested in the personal change that you've seen in yourself as a chief operating officer. It's not been that much between May and now, but I'm curious whether, or rather not whether, I'm sure there are some learnings that you are discovering about yourself when you're spearheading innovation, when you're doing Deel for the first time, which is being done for the first time in mankind's history, right?
For sure. I think that they're pretty typical, though. I have a number of mentors in the technology industry, some of which come from really big companies like Twitter and Google, and some of which come from high growth startups, and some of which aren't people that I get to meet. Some of the people that I get to connect with through material that they've written. I get to read their books, and
Okay.
I think that the changes that you experience as a executive at a high growth company are really interesting. I think that there's more of an emphasis on strategy now at this stage. And what is strategy? Well, strategy is making sure that everyone within the organization knows exactly why we're doing everything that we're doing and exactly the direction we're going in. I think that you need to build the full stack teams that I've mentioned in a way that they can operate independently, and you don't need to necessarily be monitoring and watching them 24/7. And then there are more fundamental things which are a little bit interesting. Up until about 300 people, everyone within the company personally, you can meet them all and say hello. Now you get to that stage where you don't know everyone, and that's a little bit interesting, and it's really important that you have that framework in place to make sure that the culture is extending throughout the team. Deel is going to become a much larger organization to support the growth that we have ahead of us. And that's something that I'm really personally excited by, and really excited to scale the business and take it all the way.
And if I may again, of course, Deel and the space in which Deel operates or is actually creating and driving as a pioneer, that's your bread, butter, the table, the plate, and everything in between. Are there some other spaces that are close to your heart in the IT world? For example, fintech might be too general, but narrowing it down to something else. I'm just curious if there are some spaces that you're watching, because from some people, of course, we hear, well, I'm doing, let's say, banking for a specific demographic, but I really like crypto. So I'm curious if there are some spaces that you're watching closely just outside of Deel and your day to day.
Yeah, there's a few things that I'm pretty passionate about. So crypto and blockchain is one of them, and we're working on some really cool blockchain initiatives at Deel. I think that what I really like around blockchain is access. So how can we give access to, say, US dollar denominated stablecoin accounts that earn a yield for someone in a country that can't get those accounts, someone that's based in Argentina or Turkey where the currency is very volatile. That's something that I'm really passionate about because A, it's very interesting and we can build really cool product there because we have the fundamental understanding, but B, it's really impactful for the customer. That's one of the things that I'm really interested in, and the other one is anti-fraud and AML. So we have a flawless fraud record at Deel and AML record at Deel, and that's something that I'm really passionate about. And we've kind of over-engineered our systems and built them from the ground up to ensure we don't get in any trouble there and keep the bad guys out. We want to make sure all of our customers are safe and make sure all of the money flowing through the platform is for the right reasons.
Okay, but the money usually would be flowing from employer to employee, right? Are there any instances where it's working the other way around?
Correct. It's flowing from employer to employee.
Okay, so when you say AML, is that to say that there are some people who are trying to use a platform to use it without
There could be.
use?
There could be, and you need to have those controls in place to make sure that companies are who they say they are and employees are who they say they are, and they're working for legitimate reasons in the correct industry.
Okay, yeah, that's a broader perspective than what I had in mind at first. Okay, so I'm guessing you remember the magic wand question. I hand you the magic wand remotely, you wave it, abracadabra, and every 12-year-old in the world gets a specific education or access to it. We're not forcing anybody to learn anything. Is there something new? Is there a change compared to the previous answer?
Wow, I'm not sure if I can remember the previous answer. It's a really tough question.
There's no right answer. There's only your answer and why.
Yeah. Wow, I'm stumped at this question. It's too big, Philip.
I'm sorry. I mean, we've heard, of course, financial prudence, design thinking,
I think
a lot of things. But one curious answer was leave the kids alone, let them be 12-year-olds.
I think it would actually be critical thinking, which is championed throughout education anyway. But I think the critical thinking that I was certainly taught in my kind of secondary education in the UK was not what's practiced in technology and consulting and the various other industries that we operate in. I think like extracting those principles, which are really very simple things to understand and learn and practice, and embedding them in education would be really cool.
There you have it. So I think we're 50 minutes into the interview. There's no further questions from the audience. I'm just wondering if there's anything you'd like to say as a closing remark before I go back to the arena of Web Summit and try to meet some more Deel folk.
No, just thanks for having me, and enjoy the rest of Web Summit.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dan. And to everybody else watching, there are some NetGuru people over at Web Summit. So feel free to reach out. We're happy to talk. We're happy to meet you face to face. And actually, we are running some 3 5-minute interviews with executives and CEOs to have a Web Summit reportage after the Web Summit. So if you're keen for a tiny fraction of what we just had with Dan, let me know. I have my camera with me and we can make it happen. And in the meantime, everybody, thank you for watching and see you next Tuesday on Disruption Talks.
Thanks.